Hello, everyone. This is Julie from August Birdsong, and I am back with the rest of my visual story called Enchanted Lands. This is a piece of art, this storybook, that was commissioned by my friend Catherine Stenhjem, who is herself an artist, a painter, and we are starting back in the midst of summer with the goddess Divana, and she is comparable to the Greek goddess Artemis, the Roman goddess Diana, in that she was a protector of wild things, the wildlife, and the nature around it. And this is a fussy cut image of a painting that my friend Catherine had made. And her painting was this beautiful sort of fairy tale figure. And for the purposes of my story, I'm going to call her the goddess Divana. But as you can see, I have fussy cut out the background and layered in some greenery around Catherine's figure. And then also I built in a pocket down here using a painting I found in the public domain, and it's a painting of fairies. And here we have sort of a fairy queen, a little minor fairy, and she's riding a bird, and there's actually mice pulling like her bird chariot. And here we have almost like a moth fairy. And so I thought that was a good place. It's a pocket. I have some things that I took out of it. But that is what is on the bottom of that page. And here I have the quotes, the voices whispering in the trees. And then this is just some words I separated from a Hardy Boys book, but it says the hidden, the shadow. And even if you look close here, this is a leaf man. He's like a leaf fairy in that. And that's a big part of this book, is this idea of imagination and fantastical creatures in the Slavic folklore and mythology. And so this just seemed to fit with it. And I've also included in the pocket, here we have a beautiful woodland scene with all of this. I think of it as maybe moss and just plant life that has grown over the floor of this forest. And this is, again, a painting that I found. And here we have an image of the idleness of summer, and for noble ladies, more of a time to relax in the shade and maybe play music and listen to poetry, or to tell stories and myths of all the things, the mysteries of the forest. Now, I found this in the public domain, and this is, here it's with a W, but I think it's actually pronounced Velis. And he was a god who could shapeshift, and in this case, he is in the form of, I would say, a wolf. And he was, from what I understand, kind of a protector of, if we talk about, with the Slavic mythology, kind of the world tree. He was sort of the earthly level as well as the underworld, is at least, generally my understanding. And he was a protector, actually, of, like cattle and such, which seems a little ironic with him in the form of a wolf. But it's all part of this incredible mythology of their characters. And so he could be a trickster, and maybe that's where more of the wolf comes in. He could also be very benevolent and protective of, the earthly level and all of that. And so I thought that was a real interesting illustration. And there's a date, 1905, on that. And I found that in the public domain, and I was just looking at kind of like public domain vintage Slavic paintings, something to that effect, or illustrations. And then on the other side is this well, noble lady, a queen, it looks like. And here it just shows you how everything was personified in the forest and in the land. And these are sort of little, sort of elves. I don't know if they were trolls, because I think they lived more underground, but little like wood elves who lived in the trees. And, he's whispering a secret to her. And they're sort of laughing and joking down here. And so in Slavic mythology, as with many, different cultures' mythologies, everything was given a personality and characteristics that fit into the storytelling. And it helped to bring order to a world that couldn't often be explained. For example, let's say that something had happened and cattle were stolen, or, attacked. And maybe in the story there would be something about that Veles had gone down to the underworld and that some other mythic character had snuck in and stolen the cattle. Well, that might be how they would explain the fact that maybe it's just the cattle wandered away, or maybe that the cattle really were stolen or lost by, other people. But the stories helped them understand why things happened when they didn't always have answers. And so here we're at the height of summer. This is probably about August, September. The apples are, in full bloom on the tree, maybe even late September. And we have, again, a beautiful, noble woman, a queen. And just like my opening picture, she has the beautiful, this is called the kokshnik, on her head, which is this expensive, beautiful flowing headdress. And it would have incredible embroidery. And as you can see, she has the embroidery and jewels on it. And these were extremely expensive. So only wealthy people or nobility would have had these. But here in the background, we have the festival of Mokosh going on. And in my earlier video, I mentioned that Mokosh was the goddess of sort of women's daily lives. She was called the grain mother, and also the giver and taker. And I mentioned her before with Spring and Vesna, the sort of Persephone character. Here, she is just, this is what the festival is celebrating, is the goodness of Mokosh and the fruitful harvest and the richness of life. And she was a protector of women in their mythology. And moving on to the back page here, we have a page that's sort of dedicated to the storytelling and the fairy tales. And so much of when we think of fairy tales and all, and we often think of the Brothers Grimm when we're thinking of fairy tales. But fairy tales have been around for centuries, long before the Brothers Grimm even. And in particular, the tale of Cinderella, its earliest origins were with the ancient Greeks 2,000 years ago. That there was a story told that had the same elements of the traditional Cinderella story with, poor Cinderella is the servant to her mean stepsisters and stepmother, etc. And so I'm using this girl who is not nearly as grand as, for example, this woman. And she is representing the Slavic Cinderella, whose name was Zaluska. And so she's representing Zaluska for this. And sorry, I've got some notes to the side. I'm just switching the page here. And so I've placed her with just the flowers, the wild flowers she's collected. But I've put her around these beautiful and dramatic red flowers. And I did that to match up the flowers in the image in the painting of her. And with this summer festival, as I mentioned earlier, with the spring one as well, young girls would weave flowers and into garlands and headdresses, wreaths that they wore on their heads. And they would go down by the river, the bodies of water, because in Slavic myth, water, there was a sea god and river gods, and the water was a big part of the storytelling, also because we need water for crops to grow. And so if you were a society that was dependent on those crops, as all societies are, and in a time where if there was some sort of a drought or even an extensive flood where your whole food supply could be wiped out, well, that was a matter of life and death for a community. And so they would often go down to the river in bodies of water and celebrate and throw flowers and even sometimes gifts out onto the water for the different gods and goddesses or even fairy spirits. And so here, one of the stories that goes with the idea of a river god is the story of Sadko and the Sea Czar. And the Sea Czar, we're going to pretend this is him for now. This is actually a painting of the Sea Czar that I attached to this page here. But the Sea Czar kidnapped a musician, a man named Sadko. And he was an earthly man, and he was married. And even in this image, here is his human wife. Well, the river czar kidnapped him to marry his own daughter, whose name was Chernava. And this is her in this beautiful painting that I found on the public domain. And look at here, she even has, this is like sort of a mermaid seahorse sort of carriage. She is being brought to Sadko. Well, Sadko was forced to marry Chernava, but she knew he was very sad. And so one night, she turned herself into a little stream that could go up to the surface of the river. And he was able to climb up that stream that she had turned herself into and return to his wife on land. And so this is a painting from in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, depicting that story. And here is my modern take on how her father reacted. And he was angry because he had been outwitted. They had both basically, betrayed him by, Sadko not staying there. This image, I cut it out a bit to have it in this background, but it's actually called the Sea Czar dancing, I think is what it's called. But I chose to depict him as sort of throwing a fishy fit, if you want to call it that. And even the fish here are looking on. And in this image, in this original painting, you can see here was Sadko and Chernava there. But in the long run, Sadko, I think I called him Shadko, Sadko was able to actually return to his wife on land. And down here on the bottom of the ocean, I have put, or in the bottom of a river, I have put these gemstones, these beautiful minerals, and all down there, because he is a Sea Czar, and so he would be wealthy. And so that is the story of Sadko and the Sea Czar. And so we come to this set of pages then. And here is another fairy tale. And this is of Ivan Tsarovich and the Firebird. And I'm not going to go into the details of the whole story, but essentially he's given different challenges. And here he is actually grabbing one of the tail feathers of the firebird. And this is a story especially for the northern or, eastern Slavic lands where the winters are dark and very cold. And just one tail feather could light the hall and keep it warm. And so this is a mythic hero who is on this journey. He's the same one who also will rescue and marry our young gal from the very beginning of the story, when we mentioned Helen the Beautiful in my earlier video. But look at all the detail and the beautiful painted graphics of that original painting. And then here we have a lovely tribute to fall. And this is a painting by my friend Catherine. And a sort of bird woman. But it also really reminded me of fall and the leaves. Maybe an autumn goddess for my purposes. And I thought that she fit well here with this vintage painting of this early winter scene. And the river is not yet frozen over, you can see totally. And we have this beautiful sunset. And so here I have sunset skies bound between the tides. And this is on that klimped paper. Stamperia makes the klimped paper, and that's where that's from. But look at the beautiful details in Catherine's painting. And this is just some tea bag where I emptied the tea, and it's very delicate. It's just like tissue paper, and it is colored from the tea. And I stamped some geese on it. And that's what that is. And that seemed fitting for fall and the cool weather. So here we come to this page, which is again a celebration of fall and all the bounty of the season before moving into the cold, dark months of winter, especially for the areas of Eastern Slavic countries like Ukraine and Belarus and Russia, and the darkness of that time. And so, again, this is sort of a celebration of fall. And down here, I have a fortune teller. And one thing, not so much at Halloween time in the Slavic culture, they didn't really celebrate Halloween. It was more around the coming up on Christmas, on that time in December. They would play games and look for ways to find out their fortune for the future. And for young girls and young women, there was a lot of fear around who will my husband be? Because as I mentioned earlier, these, people were living in a patriarchal society. Women were part of the property of the man, whether it was the father or the uncle or the husband. And they didn't have a lot of control over their own personal lives and choices. So here I have the fortune teller telling the girl, fear not. And so I'm not sure if she was reading her palm or just the cards, but she is giving her a hopeful sign that maybe she will marry a handsome and wealthy and kind husband. And moving on to this side then, we have these two pages. And this is another painting by Catherine. And we have this beautiful dragon, or Zmi is the Slavic name for dragon. And again, we have sort of a forest fairy here. And just the colors of this dragon reminded me so much of fall leaves. And so just the burnt reds and oranges and rusts and golds. And so I have them again in the foliage surrounding them. Maybe here is a manor house, a noble's house, and they are in the grasses, hiding in the grasses. And again, you can only see them through your imagination. And so we come into December and January. And this scene really is December because it deals with Christmas time. And the Slavic people had a unique take on the St. Nicholas Santa Claus figure in that their version of, say, Santa Claus or St. Nicholas had a helper, and it wasn't an elf or a male. You may remember if you've seen my video with the graphics fairy on the kind of the origins of St. Nicholas. He also would go around with a character called Rue Claus, who would punish the naughty children. But the Slavic people have, this is a snow maiden, who in their story is a granddaughter of St. Nicholas or the Santa Claus figure. And so here, Catherine painted this picture in the background of the snow maiden on the polar bear. And so I wanted to make it, for this page, I wanted them coming through the woods and the forest and that sense of, you know, the winter and the snow and the wind and the darkness surrounding them. And this is some hard mixed media paper Catherine sent me that she had a bunch of paints and maybe some inks on. And if I had wanted to use that in some way, you know, I could use it. And so I've put it on this page, kind of representing that sense of the dark night sky of winter, maybe even going out to the universe. We have the geese flying again here on some tea bag. And I have the trees coming up behind them, disguised by this snowy, fibrous sort of ribbon and tissue. And even here, we have our ravens or crows there calling in the wind. And yet we have this glowing sort of fairy figure of the snow maiden down here on that beautiful polar bear. And so that's where that page went as far as the story goes. And so we're in winter, and here we come to a little like village or town area. And again, this just continues that theme of storytelling. And up here are sort of some foxes. This is a vintage illustration. And they look like they're up to no good, probably plotting plans to steal chickens from the hen house or something like that. And I just had these girls here, and they're waiting for spring with hopes of the pussy willow buds that I was talking about. And here I have again, this is actually the fortune teller's ball. I'm not using it as the moon in this particular scene. But I have put, you know, again, this trim on here for the iciness and rockiness of the creek bed down there. And then we had some things in the pockets. And here is again a vintage painting of Ivan and the wolf. And that is, there's several stories with Ivan, and one's with the firebird and one's with the wolf, and they're all interrelated. But then this would be the princess that he was rescuing. And so that is Helen the Beautiful. In this is a different artist's depiction of her. And so that's what that's from. And then here I just put this vintage photograph of a fortune teller because I was just talking about the young girls wanting their fortunes read. And it was something that was done at Christmas time. And young girls, they would do different things with candles and mirrors, all in the hopes of finding out who their husband would be, because their whole future was tied to who they would ultimately marry and what their life would be like. And of course, we all want to think we will be happy and safe. And so I've included her, and I just love her gypsy-like headdress and all. So I've included her in this. And then here I have this kind of mythical image painting of a wedding scene. And look here, you even have sort of an angel figure. Or I'm thinking of Eurillo, who I talked about with the spring in the journal, in the storybook. And he that makes me think of Eurillo and the bride and her ladies. And again, this represents that wanting to foresee the future. Who will my husband be? Will I make it through the winter and be happy? And here's just one more fun little fortune-telling card with all these these actually move on here, these little spinners. And this is just a vintage, like, postcard. So I put all that there because it was all part of sort of that Christmas winter time setting, because winter was a very precarious season. If the harvest had been bad, if there had been a drought or floods, and the food had not come in, well, then you would have a very hungry winter.